From the Toronto Star, I'm Rudgy Mudler, and this matters. Remember the good old days when social media was all about the likes? Those were simpler times, as now it feels like every day there's new research that shows that social media is bad for us and having a negative impact on society. What's interesting is that a lot of this research is coming from the social media platforms themselves. They just don't want you to see it. Facebook has recently come under fire after a number of internal documents were leaked to reporters at the Wall Street Journal. This prompted a series of stories called the Facebook Files, in which it was shown that the company's data found that 1 in 3 teenage girls' mental health was negatively impacted by its platforms, and that human traffickers were using it to recruit. But these are just the latest revelations of internal data that paints the company's platforms, which includes Instagram and WhatsApp, in a negative light. And the larger questions are, what can and should be done about it? Will Oremus writes about technology and the digital world for the Washington Post. He joins us to discuss Facebook and the pattern that has emerged when the company has to deal with research that paints it in a negative light. Will, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks.
So, Will, you're a longtime technology writer and commentator, and this has been another very bad week of reporting for Facebook with a number of revelations, many unearthed by the Wall Street Journal's recent reporting, the Facebook Files. But one of the reasons I want to talk to you is because you've been watching this company for a long time, and the pattern that's emerged is that basically its own internal research keeps showing that it has a negative effect on various aspects of society, and then the company basically buries it and just moves along. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think in many cases that is fair to say. It's hard to say exactly what the company does with all its internal research. I mean, look, clearly Facebook cares to some degree about its impacts on society. It's paying people to study things like the effect of Instagram on users' mental health, things like the effect of Facebook groups on right-wing extremist organizing in the United States. It pays tons and tons of content moderators and people who work in ethics and site integrity and security. And yet, a lot of their work, a lot of the work that seems to cast doubt on some of the fundamental dynamics of the platform doesn't make it out of the company unless it's by one of these leaks to the media or to an advocacy organization. And that must be immensely frustrating for the people who do this work. I mean, they come up with these findings, they get up every day going to work because they think they're going to make the site better. And then they recommend that these changes need to happen, or that they point out that there's a serious problem here, and it just goes nowhere because, I mean, I suspect that is often because to make the changes needed to address those problems would compromise the core business model. And when that happens, I think Facebook has shown that it will choose the business model over the changes.
Let's talk a little bit about some of these very specific examples. The most recent one is this reporting about Instagram hurting teen girls' body image, mental health, and potentially leading to more eating disorders. That is the big one that came out last week. But there's been talk about the extremism and how it might have helped foment the January 6th riots. The other one that's interesting to me was that they're phasing out CrowdTangle, which was a tool that let people look at their data. But again, the results really weren't very positive for them. And so these are things that just literally happened in pretty much the last 6 months or so, right?
Yeah. And in fact, I mean, all last week, these Facebook file reports from the Wall Street Journal, there was a new one on each day. And different people will think that one or the other was more or less convincing, more or less damning. Taken together, they certainly show a pattern, a consistent pattern of Facebook not revealing internal research that makes it look bad. One of the ones that was most interesting to me actually was a finding that Facebook's ability to enforce its rules outside of its primary markets is just so spotty. I mean, it's like, in the United States, you can get banned from Facebook for an awkward phrasing about the science of COVID-19. And in Mexico, the journal found that people running drug cartels were hiring hitmen on Facebook to kill people. And the company didn't do anything about it. I mean, this is really, to me, unconscionable that you would run a global platform, but only consistently enforce your rules in your biggest revenue markets. I mean, none of this is new. I mean, this is the story of Facebook in Myanmar years ago, when there was ethnic cleansing going on there and people were saying, look, this ethnic cleansing is being organized on Facebook and WhatsApp, and Facebook didn't have the resources to respond properly and ended up being accused by the United Nations of contributing to genocide there.
I kind of want to break this down a little further because obviously I think you and I know a little bit about how the sausage is made in terms of we're journalists. And the only reason we're finding out about this is through leaks. And basically we've been hearing some reports of internal Facebook employees who are having a lot of problems with the effect that the company is having around the world. We should talk about that because basically it's clear that this podcast is probably going to be pretty Facebook bashing. But the only reason we are hearing about these things is from these employees who clearly do care. Right?
Yeah. Look, I don't think that you need to view Facebook as being evil or full of bad people who don't care about society in order to see that it has some pretty deep flaws that we should be concerned about. It's in this awkward position, along with a couple of other dominant tech platforms, where it's a private business, that's run to grow and to make money. And yet it's so influential in society that we kind of keep wanting and expecting it to behave in the public interest rather than in its own interest. And so the incentives, there's public pressure, there's pressure from regulators, there's pressure from Facebook's own employees and their conscience who are, asking the company to act in a better way or to address problems. But at the end of the day, their biggest pressure is to continue running a successful business. And when those don't align, running the successful business seems to be the highest priority. It's a situation that a lot of people believe cries out for regulation, because that's where regulation can come in, is when the profit motive and the interests of society don't necessarily align. It's interesting. Even Facebook is running ads asking for regulation. Now, they tend to publicly say, well, we want regulation. And then behind the scenes, they're kind of lobbying to make sure that that regulation reflects their interests. But I think there are people at Facebook who know that this situation isn't great. It isn't sustainable. The company is getting nonstop public relations disasters while making money hand over fist. Something's got to give.
I'm not sure if it does. My next question was literally, how do we tackle this problem? But you just said it. It's a for-profit company. They can make the argument that they're doing what they're supposed to do. Their defense is that people are cherry-picking data, and look at all the good that our technology and platforms do in the way that they connect people. And that's also true, right?
Yeah, no doubt. Social media, it's very easy to overlook the good things about social media now that we're accustomed to them. And we certainly can see a lot of the bad things. There are social movements happening around the world that are facilitated in part by social media. Lots of people are able to publicize things that they wouldn't have been able to easily publicize otherwise. Certainly the attention to in the United States, the attention given to police shootings of unarmed Black men, I think that has been driven in part by social media, by the ability of people to get these stories out directly. At least one of the shootings was live streamed on Facebook. And then, of course, the mundane things like the ability to keep up with old friends, the ability to see your cousin's new baby pictures. There's all kinds of good that comes from social media. I think Facebook wants to make it sort of a binary, like either we have all these good things and then we have to accept all the bad things with them, or we don't have social media at all. I think critics would question that dichotomy. We would hope that we could get a lot of the good from social media without necessarily having it lend itself so much to extremism, to polarization, to divisiveness, to propaganda campaigns, without having it distort our media and our news environment to the degree that it does. So, it is funny though. Facebook, their profits, their growth don't seem to be impacted no matter how many scandals they have.
We'll be right back. Okay, first off, on the positive front, let's not forget, the birthday messages. That is always a great one every year. I actually like still. And one of the reasons my account remains there. But you just said it. Countries are talking about regulation, but I think one of the giant issues here is that you have the parable about the 4 blind men and the elephant. It's just so big and unwielding. Over here you have Black men being live streamed and killed. Over here you have a genocide. Over here you have it's affecting mental health or causing people to be more partisan. It's funny, let's bring this back to this research. Its own research is telling this is bad. Is there a way that we can regulate that it tells us what it's doing? Obviously, to make an informed decision about how to improve it, it'd be better to have information. It's their data. We've already said it's a black box. How do we facilitate that? Is there a way?
Yeah, I think regulation around transparency is probably the low-hanging fruit here. This should be an issue that people of all political stripes can get behind, that we should just have more insight into what's going on these platforms. How exactly you achieve that? I mean, I think there are complexities how you achieve it while preserving privacy for users, how you achieve it while allowing companies to have proprietary algorithms or that sort of thing, or to make changes on the fly without having to get government approval for everything. There are complexities, but I think certainly laws around transparency would make a lot of sense and would be sort of a good first step, because it's true that figuring out how to regulate these platforms in a useful way is not easy either. I mean, if the government started stepping in and telling companies exactly how their algorithms should work or exactly what data they can and can't collect, I'm not saying that couldn't be worthwhile, but there's certainly the potential for missteps there. So just, getting more access to data, it's hard to see the downside of that, really. And, when we see these damning reports that are leaked from Facebook, to be fair, I mean, they're not definitive any more than any other study. I mean, the study that found that 1 in 3 teen girls on Instagram reports body image and mental health issues linked with their use of Instagram, that is extremely concerning. If not, it's probably not surprising or shocking to people who spend a lot of time on the platform. It's extremely concerning. And at the same time, I mean, you could imagine a study, maybe Facebook has done other studies framed in a different way that arrives at a different finding. Maybe if people's body images weren't coming from their use of Instagram, they'd be coming from TV or magazines or TikTok or whatever else, right? So I think just the ability to do more and better research, and for people other than Facebook to be doing this research, would really help.
Well, I really hate to be the personal responsibility guy, but how much of this is on us, the users? I mean, I think I mentioned to you before, like Facebook, I'm just mitigating my usage a lot, just less time on it. But Instagram is the one that I still use and enjoy. So I'm basically trapped in that web. They've got me still. So what about us?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's always more that we could be doing on an individual level in terms of using these platforms in the smartest ways. I know that from my own social media habits, there are things I could do differently, but I'm skeptical of the idea that individual change is the answer here, or that users changing their habits is really the answer. I mean, people who are on these platforms respond to the incentives that the platforms create for them. These platforms are games in a way, right? You post on Instagram and you get a little number that shows how many likes you got. I mean, Instagram's experimented with removing those like counters, at least the public views. But fundamentally, I mean, these are machines that play on our psychologies to get us coming back. Their algorithms are designed around many things, but one of the constants in social media algorithms is that they optimize for getting people to come back again and again. And they do it by tapping into our brain's reward centers, our fear centers. They're very manipulative platforms. And so I think the onus is really on the platforms and on regulators to change the dynamics more than on users to change their behavior. I mean, human nature is what it is. It's not just saying like, well, the reason bad stuff happens on Facebook is because there are bad people. Well, yes, that's true. But Facebook amplifies a lot of the bad behavior and it incentivizes a lot of the bad behavior. And that's not on the bad people. That's on Facebook.
Do you think we've got to this point because of the pursuit of engagement, those dopamine hits? The fact that Facebook has prioritized this over everything else has kind of got us to this point?
Certainly, if you were trying to point to one or two big drivers of the problems, I mean, the fact that it's not just Facebook, all these social media platforms are in a battle every day with each other and with the rest of the attention economy, right? With the media, with TV, they're in a battle to retain people's attention. Their business model is based on having eyeballs on ads again and again, day after day, year after year. Their systems are all geared toward it. And we've seen many, many reports that when a proposed change that's meant to address some of the flaws in these platforms conflicts with the growth metrics, with the engagement metrics, that the growth and engagement metrics win out. And so I think certainly that is one of the biggest things. I mean, I think also that you could look at the targeted ad model, which of course is related to the desire for growth and engagement. But Facebook was after growth and engagement before it even had the ad model. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg wanted his platform to reach billions of people. He wanted to be a dominant force in society. And so I think the desire to be ubiquitous and to be dominant runs even deeper than the targeted ad model, at least at Facebook. But again, just to go back to the idea that it's not only Facebook, if Facebook weren't winning this battle for our attention, something else would be. You can't really fix these platforms one at a time. If you imagine a platform where all the algorithms and all the design was built to sort of slow us down, make us thoughtful, encourage posting only stuff that's trustworthy, it just wouldn't get any traction. Like, it wouldn't be addictive. People wouldn't spend their time on it. And so it wouldn't help. I think this is a systemic problem with the competitive marketplace for social networks. It's not a problem that is limited to any one company.
I was going to actually make this point too. Like, obviously, it's not just Facebook. I just read some awful research about TikTok and how it's a hatescape was the word that they used of racism. But one of the points in there was that TikTok is moving so fast that it just needs more research to even study its effects. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and TikTok and YouTube are particularly hard to study because video is more challenging. I mean, text is easy to analyze, it's easy to search, it doesn't take up much storage space, it requires less computing power to analyze. Analyzing video is just it's hard to do. It takes a lot of computing power. And so those platforms are more opaque fundamentally than platforms that are based on text or even just still images. But of course, all of social media is moving more in the direction of video. So this is a problem that needs to be addressed. And when you hear about some of the problems coming out of Facebook covering up the problems, it is tempting to say these are just bad people. Mark Zuckerberg is evil. He doesn't care. Sheryl Sandberg is evil. She doesn't care. I'm not going to necessarily go out on a limb going to bat for either of those executives. I don't think that gets us anywhere. I mean, it's not a one person problem. It's not a one company problem. It is a problem of structural incentives, and it's not going to be an easy fix. And if we think that the problem is that we have an evil person at the helm of Facebook, well, we're going to be very disappointed if someday we get a different person at the helm of Facebook and we still have all the same problems with social media in society, whether it's Facebook or whether it's somebody else.
So one of the things that's come out of all this recent reporting is this new saying. And some people are saying that social media is being likened to the new smoking. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's some parallels there. I mean, we know that the big tobacco companies had research that showed that their products were harmful to people's health. We know that they buried those findings. They tried to keep them secret because their businesses required them to keep people hooked, keep people buying cigarettes. And so I think that certainly we're seeing that in social media. They're finding health harms, they're finding societal harms, and they're saying, well, if we change this, then people wouldn't be as addicted to our service anymore. They wouldn't come back as much, and then we would suffer as a company. So yeah, I mean, I think there are parallels. I think we want to be careful about taking those analogies too literally. I think you'd be hard pressed to make the positive case, the societal positive case for smoking that you can for social media. I think in theory, you could imagine banning tobacco and not seriously hurting the foundations of civil society. But at this point, if you tried to ban social media, I think there would be serious negative impacts from that. I mean, a lot of people would be hurt by that. There are real trade-offs in social media that I think are not there to the same degree when we talk about smoking. So I think definitely an instructive analogy in some ways, but it's not the same.
Well, this has been fantastic for us. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you think our listeners should know?
I think one really interesting direction for where regulation of social media could go would be to get insight into the feed ranking algorithms, the recommendation algorithms. What if those were required to be open sourced? I mean, this is a little out of left field. I mean, there would be downsides, there are trade-offs to consider. But what if we didn't treat it as a fundamental right for a dominant social platform to keep its algorithms secret from us and to have that be a proprietary special sauce? I could see a lot of promise in the idea that researchers could go in and study the code that decides what we see when we open Facebook or Twitter or TikTok. And I think that's something worth considering because I think the algorithms are really at the root of a lot of the issues, not all the issues, but really at the root of a lot of the issues with these platforms. It's the fact that they are designed to show us the content that is the most addictive or the most provocative, the most enraging, the content that triggers an immediate gut instinct or visceral response. And so if we could get better insights into what metrics they're using to decide what to show us, I think that could be helpful.
Opening the black box sounds like a great idea to me. Will, this has been really fantastic for us. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so much for the thoughtful questions. It was good to join you.
Will Oremus writes about technology and the digital world for the Washington Post. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm your host, Raju Mudder. Our This Matters team is Adrian Chung, Brian Bradley, JP Fozo, Matt Hearn, Morgan Bachneck, Saba Etizaz, and Sean Pattenden. Our music is by So-Called, Mike DeAngelis, and Sean Pattenden. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com/subscribingmatters. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.